Hey everyone, welcome back to Taproot TV. I'm Benny Hughes and I'm here today with Mark Paradise. Mark, we're going to talk about a topic that you are very well versed in.
Yes.
You have a lot of experience in it.
Are you trying to say I'm a deviant?
No.
Okay.
Excellence is your key.
Okay, that's good. I like that. I like that better.
Yes, absolutely. The normalization of deviation.
Yes, yes.
And it's an incredibly interesting topic. I heard you speak a couple of weeks ago at the Human Error course at the pre-summit, and it was a good part of that course. Explain to us a little bit about first, there was a Harvard Business School article.
Yeah, this is something I ran into. I ran into this article from Harvard Business School called "Does One Bad Apple Spoil or Can One Bad Apple Spoil the Whole Bunch, or Does One Bad Apple Spoil the Whole Bunch?" And it was about normalization of deviation, but about financial advisors, dishonest financial advisors. And what they found is when they brought in a dishonest financial advisor, somebody who's going to sell you stocks you don't really need, somebody who's going to sell you life insurance you don't really need, or annuity contracts you don't really need, that spreads throughout the rest of the group, rather than having a really good guy spread his good practices throughout the group. So the one bad apple did tend to ruin the whole bunch.
Well, and the others are having to make up for that bad they're always having to resell themselves, the positive aspects.
No, besides that, he gets ahead of them because he's willing to do anything, and then their bosses push them to do anything, and it tends to make the whole group worse, rather than, oh, I see last week you punched a bunch of stocks that didn't really do good. You shouldn't do that. That's not what happens.
So it changes culture in a really bad way.
It changes culture in a bad way. One bad apple can spoil the whole bunch. And that was the point of the article. And I thought it was really interesting that they sort of had proof of this, and it tells you in the article how they proved this. But I started thinking, that got me thinking about normalization and deviation. And my experience, which is I was in the nuclear Navy, and an experience I had in the nuclear Navy, not where I encouraged deviation, but where I got brought in to a group that had sort of gone astray, if you will. They had a leader, a division officer, he was a really smart guy. He was a really smart guy, and he did really, really genius kind of guy, but he didn't follow the rules. And he sort of thought the rules didn't apply to him because he was so smart.
Right.
And that once again, one bad apple, people who worked for him started then breaking the rules and maybe they weren't as smart, but that wasn't the point. The point is, just because you're smart doesn't mean you can break the rules. Does that make sense? So he was breaking the rules, and I got brought in to sort of fix the division. I was experienced. I came in, and the first thing I did was start enforcing the rules. And then I got the senior leadership on that division, so it'd be your chiefs and your petty officers, first class petty officers and chiefs. And I went to them and said, "Chief, what are you doing here? Why is this way?" And he goes, "Well, the last guy." I said, "I'm not the last guy. Yeah. We're going to start enforcing the rules, and I need your help doing it." And they were like, "Oh, thank goodness," because we didn't, we'd sort of
you could go be the bad guy.
Yes, we've been left out up to this point. We really felt like we'd lost our leadership position because he was encouraging people to break the rules, and we couldn't do anything about it because that's the way he was.
Right.
And so this is going to sound a strange thing, within about less than a month, let's just say less than a month, we changed the culture of that small organization, that small part of it. And it was easy to do somewhat because the rest of the culture around us supported that. Right. But it still was a dramatic change in a relatively short period of time. And I think it made a big difference.
Well, and it's in a basically a culture where leadership is, people do follow their leadership.
Yep.
That's not always the case in a lot of companies.
Well, it all depends on that company's culture, doesn't it?
Exactly, and it's like the same. What they say: you're only as strong as the weakest link.
Yep.
And that was kind of sounds like what that was. So you're kind of teaching this in that human error course, stopping human error course. So what's the guidelines to get people to move from that normalization of deviation to the normalization of excellence?
Okay, so I wrote a whole article on that. Let me tell you the end of the story first,
okay.
Right? Before we go off on how did Rickover do what he did, I think it's important to hear the end of this lesson learned. So I don't even remember the guy's name, but he came off of that division officer and he went into doing his qualification as an engineer. And you took a couple weeks to study, and then you went off to the engineer's exam. And to make sense of this, I need to tell you my Admiral Rickover story.
Okay.
Okay. So when you get accepted into the program, you have to go do a series of things to be accepted in the Navy Nuke program. You have to go take a 4-hour test. And you're coming out of college. I was a college senior. I didn't know anything, right? And so you have to go take a 4-hour test, and it tests physics and math and engineering kind of curriculum stuff. And then you go do 3 interviews with the smartest people you've ever met. These are people on Rickover's staff, and they're just super genius kind of people. And they ask you questions, and you have to answer. Yeah. And in college, you don't get a lot of experience doing that because, you take tests, right, but you don't get a lot of interview experience.
Well, you're in rooms with a lot of other students.
Yeah, and you don't get, your professors are probably pretty smart guys, but they never one-on-one interview you, right? So you don't get any of that. So that was real different. And then you go have your Admiral interview. And mine was on the second day. So I got over to the second day. And you go in there in the second day, and you go into a room, and they're giving you a constant briefing on what you can and can't do when you see the Admiral. And there are things like, he says, okay, when you go in to see the Admiral, he's going to ask you questions, and he wants real answers. He doesn't want no excuse, sir. If you say no excuse, sir, he's going to throw you out of his office. So don't say no excuse, sir. And, by the way, you're going to have somebody go in with you, and they're going to follow you in, and they're going to sit in a chair directly behind you, and you're not going to say anything to them. You're not going to say anything to the Admiral. You're not to say anything until the Admiral speaks to you. When the Admiral speaks to you, he'll ask you questions. You answer the questions. Just answer the questions. Don't volunteer a lot of information. One of the things he said, he asked you if you're married, just say yes or no. Yes or no. That's an answer to that question. I said, okay. So I'm sitting there listening to all this.
No pressure.
I heard you talk about 3 or 4 times, and then they said, Midshipman Paradise. And I stood up and went with my guide who walked behind me into the office. And the first thing I remember was, my goodness, this is a shabby office for an Admiral. If this is the way Admirals live, I don't know if I want to be in the Navy. Because Rickover had an old wooden desk, and it was piled up with paper, and it wasn't a grand office at all. So I go in and I sit down, and the first thing you notice is one of the chair legs is shorter than the other 4, or the 3.
And the one you're sitting in.
Yeah, and so it leans backwards or forwards. It either tips forwards, you're sitting in the chair like this, or it leans backwards, so you're sitting in the chair like this. And so I was leaning backwards and sitting up really straight, and I started looking around, and the guy sitting behind me, and it's just sort of weird to have a guy sitting right behind you. It's a little strange. And I'm looking at Rickover, and he's got these papers, and he's pulling papers off one stack and reading them and signing some stuff, putting them in another stack, doing things. And finally, he pulls this folder off a stack, and he opens it up. And I think, oh, that's my folder. He's looking at my stuff, and he's looking at it, and he looks up and looks at me, and he goes, Midshipman Paradise, I see here you got lots of C's at the University of Illinois. Can you tell me why you did so poorly? And I'm like, gosh. No, I'm like, gosh, you didn't ask about that D or that E. Okay. Those would have been a lot harder to explain. And I said, well, sir, electrical engineering at the University of Illinois is a difficult curriculum, and that's all the better I could do. And he looked at me, and he said, all right. He looked down again. He looked up at me, and he said, are you married? And I said, no, sir. He said, are you engaged? And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, did your fiance ever tell you you're good looking? And that was just so like...
This is a bizarre interview.
What is he asking? The creepy old Admiral over there, And he's about 80 years old at this point, right? And I'm like, what in the world is this about? And it really just blew me away. And I thought, well, how do you answer this question? And I finally said, I sort of repeated it back to him. I said, well, I thought it meant that she really liked the way I looked. And he said, no, Midshipman Paradise, you're wrong. And then I had my best answer of the day. I said, yes, sir. And he goes, what she meant was she wanted to marry you. And I want you to go back and ask her what she meant and write me a letter and tell me what she meant, what she says she meant. will you do that for me? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, get out of my office. And that was the end of my interview.
You just probably came out of there like, what just happened?
Well, I came out of there thinking I need to write a letter to the admiral.
Exactly.
So when I got back, I asked my fiance what she said, and she didn't have a really good answer. But I wrote down what she said, sent it back to him, and I was good. So what you don't know is when you go back to have your interview with the admiral as an engineer exam, the first thing they ask you when you walk in to get your order signed is, do you have any outstanding correspondence with the admiral? Mm-hmm. So when I did that, they said, and I said no, and they flip open this book and they look you up, and she said, yes, I see here that you wrote your letter to the admiral. You're good to go. And I was off and done. When this guy walks in, the guy who was the break the rules guy, they said, do you have any outstanding correspondence? He said no. And they opened up the book and they said, oh no, you've got 18 letters you owe the admiral.
Oh, wow.
And he wants to know, do you want to sit down and write them now? Or do you want to tell him why it's not important when the admiral wants you to correspond with him? And he said, I'd rather go meet with the admiral. So that was the end of his career.
Wow.
He got denuked. He got kicked out of the nuclear navy. And that was the end of his nuclear navy career, because when he went to talk to the admiral said, basically, you're out of here.
Yeah.
And I think that was one way. I mean, you might think, well, that's crazy. But what Admiral Rickover liked to do was, guys from the Naval Academy, he had a real rough time in the Naval Academy. And he was a Jewish guy. He was the only Jewish guy in the Naval Academy, and he took a lot of grief for it while he was there. So he liked to give midshipmen from the Naval Academy a lot of grief, and he'd ask them the question about, why didn't you get better grades at the Naval Academy? And sometimes they'd say, well, if I would have studied harder, I would have got better grades. He'd say, okay, what I want you to do is go back and make a list of your courses, and every day I want you to write down how many hours you spend in those courses and studying for those courses, and then what grades you got in those courses, and send me a letter every week that tells me that information. How many hours you were in class, how many hours you studied, and what grades you got in that course. Will you do that for me? And they say yes. Then they go back and maybe they do 1 or 2 weeks and they stop doing it. And that's when they get 18 weeks worth of didn't write their letters.
Wow.
And they're in trouble with the admiral then. So that's what his problem was, and he didn't like to follow the rules. For me, it was only 1 letter, so it was a lot easier.
Well, you answered correctly.
I answered correctly.
Answering correctly without an excuse.
And the other thing about it was, he had a master's degree in electrical engineering, and he thought that was really hard. So the fact that I had a hard time in electrical engineering didn't seem that bad to Admiral Rickover, and therefore it wasn't a bad answer. But it was really interesting how I thought that he could see through this guy. He could see that he didn't want him in his program, and he got rid of him.
Well, he had developed his own tests over the years, sounds like.
Yeah.
So, wow, it's a great story.
So you were asking me this other question. It's a long answer.
It's a great story, though. It's one that is just captivating. I just love it.
And it gets back to the stuff we talked about in the Stopping Human Error course of conservative decision-making and how you set yourself up to have normalization of excellence rather than normalization of deviation, how Rickover did it.
Sure.
Which is what we talk about it's a pretty good sizable piece of that course.
It is.
The normalization of deviation, how you prevent that, and the conservative decision making and how you get people to do that. And so I try to bring that experience in the nuclear Navy into the course so that other people can sort of see how do we apply this where we work.
Mm-hmm. Well, and setting those expectations, I remember you talking about the people that you were in charge of. They learned to know that if you were going to show up at any given time, they were to do their job at all times and at a certain level at all times.
Yes,
because you could
and it's
show
important.
up right.
And I think an important thing is whenever we had inspections, we were ready because we lived our life in that kind of mode that we wanted to be ready all the time. We wanted to have our best foot forward all the time. So when you got inspected, well, it wasn't something new you had to prepare for. You were prepared for it because that's the way you lived.
Yeah. I think that's great. And people know what to expect and know what to do.
Yep.
And when those things get lax, people don't know what to do.
They don't know what to
and
do.
People like leadership.
They like I don't know, this is going to sound sort of weird. It's sort of like your kids. They want you to make rules for them. If you don't make rules for them, then it's like, well, what am I supposed to do?
Exactly.
And it's one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. The behavior tends to go to the worst.
It does.
When it doesn't have guidance rather than going to the best.
And it's not because they mean to do that. It's just because that's what the culture becomes.
Yes.
And the standards start decreasing. And
yes.
So that's why you want to... the normalization of excellence.
Yes, which is the whole point. But and if you want to read more about Rickover and normalization of excellence, we'll put a link. There's a 7-part article that I wrote a little while ago, and it's got 7 parts.
Yep.
And there's a page the link goes to that tells you what those 7 parts are and how they fit together and how they can help you normalize excellence rather than normalize deviation, or deviance is another way sometimes people say that. But it's a good read and helpful information.
Yeah, so
and then
we'll
if they're really interested in that, they can come to our course that's coming up in September.
Yes.
Long time away, but start planning for it now.
This will be a public course.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Most of the time we don't have those specialty public courses.
Yes, so we do. So we're going to have one in September, and we're going to have another one in December, and then we'll have another one before the summit in June of next year. Yes, June of next year for the summit. Yeah. So that'll be great.
Well, I took the course. I highly recommend that people take it, and you have your book as well. But the course it was two days of fantastic information.
Thank you.
I think I came out of it learning a lot, and I feel like everybody else did too. So look on our website for that information. We'll
put a course link in there also, so
we'll
they can
do
go
that.
to the description of the course.
We like to make it easy for people, don't we? We will definitely do that in the comments. We'll put those links to the articles and to the course. And we'll put out more information as it comes along. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Bennett.
I love hearing the story. It's very engaging, and it sounds like you had quite the adventure.
Rickover stories are always fun. Let me tell you one more, just as a closing story
Okay.
here. I had a friend named Mark Franz. He went in and did his Rickover interview, and he was a history major. And so Rickover got on him about, why were you a history major? You should have been an engineering major if you want to go into my program. I don't see why I should tell you. You don't know anything about history. Tell me about this. And for Rickover, history was like his life story, right?
I mean, exactly.
He could ask you about something 60 years ago. He experienced that, right? So Great Depression, Rickover had been there. So he starts asking questions, and he gets arguments with friends, and finally he tells Mark Franz, he says, you don't know anything. Go stand in my closet and think about how much you don't know. And so he gets up, and the escort guy leads him over the closet, opens the door, and he said, when he opened the door, there's a guy already standing in the closet. And so he goes in and stands beside the guy in the closet, and he's like, they shut the door on me, and I'm in there in the dark with this guy in the closet. He said, I didn't say a word to him. He didn't say a word. I just stood there in the dark with him. He said, it seemed like forever. But he said it was probably like 10, 15 minutes, but you know, when you're standing in the dark with somebody in the closet, it seems like a long time.
Very long time.
So all of a sudden, the guy comes up, opens the door, and says, the Admiral will speak to you again. Took me out of the closet, shut the closet back on the guy who was there. He said he got kicked out of his office 2 or 3 times for, they had a room they called the penalty box, which was a little tiny room, and you'd go sit in a chair in the penalty box and think about what you'd done wrong. So finally he comes in, he takes Franz into the program, says, okay, he argued with him enough that he didn't give in or whatever it was Rickover was waiting for. And so at the end of it, Franz always went, and I've always been wondering, what happened to that guy who was in the closet? Did he
Those
ever
are
get
great
out?
stories.
So
I'm thinking only in the military.
Yeah, so everybody, all the nukes had, back in the days of Rickover, had their Rickover story.
Yeah.
There was a guy going to write a book about him. He actually had you submit your stories to him. I never saw the book come out, but it's an interesting concept.
The stories you told in the course related so well to the topic that they were just perfect.
Yep.
So it's just so nice to see all this coming about after all those years of experience and stuff.
It's always good to share that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, and thank you all for joining us. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell if you want to get alerts when we have new programs coming out. We do it every Wednesday around noon. And go to our website if you haven't signed up for our newsletter. Definitely sign up for our newsletter. That's how you find out about everything.
Facebook,
yes.
Taproot TV, subscribe.
Yes.
Click the little bell because you want to get notified.
Yep.
and go to our website and get the newsletter. Then you'll get all the stuff that's on our website, which
that's
is great.
the most convenient way
It is.
me to get the most
And
pertinent
these are
information.
these are posted on there too every week.
Yes.
The last week shows up on the newsletter. So.
Yeah, so you want to get that. But thank you for joining us, and we will look forward to what?
Podcasts.
Oh, we have those too.
Yeah.
We're everywhere.
The same content is a podcast. So
I had a lot of people at the summit telling me that that's what they do. They put in their earphones at work and listen to our podcast. I'm
That's
like,
great.
wow, that's fantastic.
Yep.
We appreciate it very much. All right, well, thank you for joining us. Join us back here next week, and we'll have more information for you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
bye.